On the night of October 24th, 1944, a Japanese admiral named Shoji Nishimura steered 4 warships into a narrow channel in the southern Philippines called Surigao Strait. 2 aging battleships, a heavy cruiser, 4 destroyers, and orders he almost certainly knew he wouldn't survive. He believed he was going in to strike an American beachhead from the south, while a larger Japanese fleet hit it from the north. What he didn't know was that his own high command's plan had already been read, anticipated, and turned against him. Waiting in the dark ahead wasn't a handful of coastal guns. It was 6 battleships, 8 cruisers, 28 destroyers, and 39 torpedo boats, arranged in a formation so lopsided that naval officers trained their entire careers just to get the chance to use it once. America hadn't just discovered where Japan's fleet was going. It had helped make sure Japan believed this was still a fight worth having. So how do you lure an entire battle line into a strait it can never leave and win before a single shot is fired? By the autumn of 1944, Japan wasn't losing the Pacific War. It had already lost it. What remained was only the question of how much longer the losing would take. The carrier battles at Midway, and the Philippine Sea had gutted the Imperial Navy's air power years before, leaving behind a fleet built for a kind of war it no longer had the aircraft to fight. Then, on October 20th, General Douglas MacArthur waded ashore on the island of Leyte and made good on a promise he'd made 2 years earlier, fleeing these same islands one step ahead of Japanese troops. This time, he wasn't leaving. Japan's high command understood exactly what that beachhead meant. Lose Leyte, and the Philippines would fall. Lose the Philippines, and Japan would be cut off from the oil fields it needed just to keep its ships moving, let alone fighting. So the Imperial Navy staked what little it had left on a single plan, codenamed Shogo, 3 fleets converging on Leyte Gulf from 3 directions at once, betting everything on timing, radio silence, and an American Navy that wouldn't see it coming until it no longer mattered. One of those 3 fleets was small, old, and expendable. It belonged to a commander named Shoji Nishimura, and he was never meant to win. Nishimura was no stranger to hopeless odds. Back in 1942, off Guadalcanal, he'd commanded a cruiser squadron through some of the ugliest night actions of the entire Pacific War, and the men who served under him came away calling him driving, sometimes reckless, a commander who never backed away from a night fight, even when the numbers said he should. That reputation was exactly why, barely 5 weeks before Leyte, he'd been handed Battleship Division 2, 2 dreadnoughts named Fuso and Yamashiro, both laid down before the First World War and patched back together more than once since. By 1944 standards, they weren't battleships anymore. They were relics, being asked to do a battleship's job one last time. His orders were simple and almost certainly fatal. Take that division, along with the cruiser Mogami and 4 destroyers, and push north through Surigao Strait to strike the Leyte beachhead from the south, while a far stronger force came at it from the north. He would be going in first, and largely alone. Nishimura never wrote down what he felt about that. He didn't live long enough for anyone to ask him, but everything about how he prepared for that night, quiet, deliberate, without complaint, suggests a man who had already made peace with where this was going and decided to go forward anyway. Waiting for him, though Nishimura didn't yet know it, was a man named Jesse Oldendorf. His officers called him Oli. Before the war, he'd commanded the heavy cruiser Houston on a peacetime cruise that once carried President Franklin Roosevelt, then spent the early years hunting U-boats in the Caribbean, a long way from anything that looked like glory. It was unglamorous, patient work. It suited him. By 1944, he'd been given command of the older battleships assigned to guard MacArthur's landings, ships most admirals would have considered a demotion. And here is the detail that turns this from a simple ambush into something closer to reckoning. 5 of Oldendorf's 6 battleships, West Virginia, California, Tennessee, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, had all been sunk or crippled at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Every one of them had been raised out of that harbor's mud, patched, rebuilt, and sent back to war. Only the 6th, Mississippi, had missed that morning entirely. Nearly 3 years later, the survivors of Pearl Harbor were steaming quietly into position in a strait most of the world had never heard of, forming a line across the water, waiting for a fleet flying the same flag that had once caught them sleeping. This time, they would not be the ones taken by surprise. Oldendorf's plan for the night was a trap built inside another trap. 39 PT boats, split into 3-boat teams, were posted at the strait's southern mouth. Small, fast, easy to underestimate, with one job only: spot Nishimura's ships the moment they appeared and radio a warning north. Behind them waited 2 full squadrons of destroyers, tucked along the eastern and western shores, ready to dash in from both flanks and fire torpedo spreads before the Japanese ever reached what was actually waiting for them. And behind all of that, stretched clear across the strait's northern exit where it opened into Leyte Gulf, sat 6 battleships and a line of cruisers, arranged in a single unbroken wall. Any naval officer alive would have recognized what Oldendorf had built. It's called crossing the T. Picture one fleet steaming up a channel in a column, bow to stern. The other lined up broadside across the top, like the crossbar of a letter T. The column can only answer with the guns mounted at its bow. The line across the top can fire every gun on every ship at once, down the full length of the enemy's formation. It's the single most lopsided advantage in naval gunnery, and almost impossible to pull off, unless the other fleet has nowhere left to turn. Surigao Strait made sure Nishimura wouldn't. Just before 10 p.m. on October 24th, Nishimura's force reached the southern entrance of Surigao Strait, exactly on schedule, and exactly where Oldendorf had expected. The PT boats found him first. Small, wooden, built for hit-and-run harassment rather than sinking battleships, they surged out of the dark in 3-boat teams, trying to slow the column before it got any further. It didn't go especially well for them. Nishimura's destroyer Shigure spotted the nearest boats and opened fire, and Japanese searchlights chased the little craft across the water for the next several hours. 10 of the 30 PT boats that made contact that night took hits. One, PT-493, was sunk outright. 3 American sailors were killed, 20 more wounded, before the sun came up. In terms of damage to the Japanese, the PT boats accomplished almost nothing. Not one of their torpedoes found a mark. But that was never really the point. Every contact report they radioed back up the strait told Oldendorf exactly where the Japanese were, how fast they were moving, and what course they were holding. Nishimura shrugged the attacks off and kept his ships moving north at 20 knots, confident he'd cleared the worst of it. He had no idea he'd only cleared the outer edge of the trap. Just after 3 a.m. on October 25th, the real attack began. Destroyer squadrons came screaming out of the darkness on both sides of the strait, running without lights, launching full spreads of torpedoes from miles out before wheeling away under smoke, gone before Japanese gun crews could even find the range. One destroyer alone, USS McDermott, fired a spread that struck 3 separate Japanese ships within seconds of each other, one of the most devastating single torpedo attacks any destroyer delivered in the entire war. The destroyer Yamagumo caught a torpedo and simply exploded, gone almost instantly. Michishio was hit and left dead in the water. Asagumo took a torpedo to the bow and kept moving, crippled but afloat, and the battleship Fuso, Nishimura's second dreadnought, was struck and, by most accounts of the wreck, broke apart into 2 burning halves that drifted separately down the strait, lighting the water like signal fires in the dark. Yamashiro herself took a hit too, but kept moving. From her bridge, Nishimura radioed a report to the fleets behind him. 2 destroyers torpedoed and drifting, but his flagship's fighting power unimpaired. He had no idea that Fuso, the ship he still believed was following close behind, was already broken in half and burning on the water he'd just passed through. Nishimura pressed on anyway, because pressing on was the only plan he had left, and that decision carried him straight into the mouth of what was waiting. At 3:52 in the morning, the battleship USS West Virginia, her radar locked onto Yamashiro from more than 20 miles out, opened fire with her 8 16-inch guns. Her first salvo hit. 2 minutes later, California and Tennessee joined in. One by one, the rest of Oldendorf's line found their targets in total darkness, guided by radar the Japanese had no equivalent for. The Japanese ships had no way to see who was hitting them, or from where. They fired blindly at muzzle flashes and shadows, while American gunners walked salvo after salvo directly onto Yamashiro's deck. Within minutes, the old battleship was ablaze along her entire length, fires lighting her silhouette against the black water. More torpedoes found her from the destroyers still darting through the smoke, and she went still in the water, listing hard to port. At 4:08, the battleship USS Mississippi, the one ship in Oldendorf's line that had never been at Pearl Harbor, finally got her own fire control solution and fired a single broadside at Yamashiro from almost 20,000 yards out. Nobody on that deck knew it yet, but it was the last broadside one battleship would ever fire at another in the history of naval warfare ever. About 10 minutes later, at roughly 4:19, the shattered Yamashiro rolled onto her side and capsized, taking Nishimura, his entire staff, her captain, and nearly all of her 1,600-man crew down with her. Only a handful of survivors from that ship ever made it home to Japan. Only one ship from Nishimura's original 7 made it out of that killing ground intact. The destroyer Shigure, a veteran of a dozen night battles in the Solomons, took a single shell through her stern, turned, and fled south down the strait, threading through burning wreckage and her own retreating countrymen in the dark. Some 40 miles back, Vice Admiral Kiyohide Shima's second striking force was only just arriving, with little idea how completely the ambush ahead had already worked. Shima's lookouts spotted wreckage burning on the water, and, in the drifting smoke, mistook the 2 shattered halves of Fuso for both of Nishimura's battleships destroyed. It was enough. Shima did the one thing nobody else on the Japanese side managed that night. He did the math, decided his weaker force stood no chance of reversing what had already happened, and ordered an immediate retreat. As his ships wheeled around, his own flagship, the cruiser Nachi, plowed straight into the limping, burning Mogami, which her captain had assumed was already dead in the water. It wasn't. The collision tore open Nachi's stern and cut her speed to 18 knots. One final, almost absurd humiliation on a night that had already gone as wrong as a naval operation possibly could. By nightfall on October 25th, Nishimura's southern force had effectively ceased to exist. 2 battleships gone, a heavy cruiser gone, 3 destroyers gone, a death toll the Navy's own post-war analysts never precisely counted, but which ran, by any reasonable estimate, into the thousands. Against all of that, Oldendorf's command lost 39 sailors killed, 114 wounded, most of them aboard a single destroyer caught in confused friendly fire in the smoke. 1 PT boat lost. That was the entire bill. Oldendorf never got the chance to fully finish the job. Even as Yamashiro was capsizing, word reached him that Kurita's powerful center force, built around the battleship Yamato, had slipped through San Bernardino Strait, far to the north, and stumbled directly into a group of lightly armed American escort carriers off Samar. His battleships were needed there, urgently, so the pursuit south was called off, and what remained of Shima's force was allowed to slip away into the night. The tactic that won this battle wasn't new. Crossing the T had been the ambition of naval commanders for centuries, but almost nobody pulled it off cleanly until 1905, when a Japanese admiral named Togo did it to Russia's fleet at Tsushima. 39 years later, that same maneuver closed the book on the Navy that had once taught the world how to use it. Surigao Strait is quiet water today. Most people crossing it have no idea what rests beneath.